Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as ever, I'm joined by Julian Darius. Howdy, Julian. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, but having watched WestWorld, I realized my hands look really strange. I'm wondering what that means.
You're having an existential moment just looking at your hands, looking at your knuckles.
How are you doing, man?
I'm not too bad. And as you can say, I was feeling the WestWorld love, and I thought I'd bring in a little bit of the look. It's not going to last. In fact, I'm going to take it off now because I'm wearing this. It's already getting a little hot. So, but yes, ladies and gentlemen, we are now getting into our sort of between season bonus episodes, and this year we are going to be doing a block of WestWorld. Starting with the 1973 Michael Crichton movie, and then working our way through the television series, the HBO television series. So then we'll be getting on to season 4 and doing our 50s block before we go into the rest of our films. But yeah, 1973 and WestWorld. This is an interesting. This is definitely a 70s future film. I kind of like it. I'm interested in some of this film's 70s gender politics as well. But yeah, overall, I actually really enjoyed this film. Going back to this film, I think it's a really good. The amount of films that owe something to this film is going to be interesting to talk about as well. I mean, it's really good fun, and Yul Brynner of all of them is clearly having a ball doing this film.
Well, I mean, apparently he just did it for the money. But, he had played Western roles before. So it was sort of like, let's throw him in there. I guess they did most of the casting like in the 2 days before they started shooting. But, yeah, I mean, I love this movie. And, it's one of these movies that kind of like doesn't amount to too much. It's just a good yarn. And I think that Crichton, he directed this, but I think Crichton stories kind of are like that they don't really, even when they try to amount to something like Jurassic Park, it's very light. And, it's sort of like tonally there, but really it's the adventure that counts.
Yeah.
And I think this is just a 90-minute, it's in, it's out, it's good stuff.
Well, it's really fast paced. I mean, this to me feels more in the mold of those 70s disaster films.
Mm-hmm.
Like you set up the cast, you set up the world in which it's going to be in. So you get this sort of like it's not so much an ensemble cast as in sort of like Tower Inferno or Earthquake or the Poseidon Adventure. It's not one of those, but you are definitely given a sort of a like a rogues gallery of characters to sort of that will be continue to be revisited through the film. So when the disaster hits, you can go, well, let's go see what's happening with them. But I like that you do get to visit those different worlds.
Well, and I like 70s disaster movies, and I like 70s sci-fi. I mean, there's less of it than 50s sci-fi, but maybe at some point we'll have to do a 70s block. 70s sci-fi is. It is so weird. It is so sort of like, it's in this like liminal state between just silly, stupid, and super serious. But it is at this point where it can let itself be meditative and thoughtful and odd, and yet also dramatic. I don't know. It's a very strange thing. But yeah, I'm with you. I like the disaster movie thing, but I love that, spoilers, that, unlike, what is so miserable about disaster movies is watching that ensemble cast all survive. And then you've got to follow them all, and it's like, oh, the boy dodged a dinosaur yet again, or, Towering Inferno, that most of them survive. Here, one character survives, and then it just becomes a sort of chase movie. That really owes, you brought on disaster, but owes a lot to horror. My theory is that basically almost everything that people like about Terminator, outside of the look of Terminator, comes from WestWorld.
Oh, 100%. I completely agree. In fact, I will go to, so I'll backtrack and give a bit more information about the film in a sec, but there is a shot in this film, and I was watching this on the big screen. I was sat watching it. It's towards the end, and it's when the character, Richard Benjamin character, he's gone into like the main hub, and he's in the, sort of the factory area, and you've got all the other robots lying around, and it kicks to Yul Brynner. And it's sort of an upward shot of him walking down the corridor, and the Brenner sort of goes into shadow, into light, into shadow, into light, and his eyes, that beautiful effect they have to make the eyes glassy and stuff, looks great. And you just have that look, and I was like, wait a minute, and I went and checked. That shot is replicated pretty much perfectly with the endoskeleton of the Terminator when they get to the factory in Terminator. And I was like, yeah, James Cameron, clearly a big fan of this film.
Yeah, that's a good catch. I also think the way the gunslinger gets sort of, he gets burned up, that reminds me a lot of Terminator 2. Just watching that robot keep coming despite being on fire and everything else is, very much like Terminator.
Oh, yeah. Well, apparently, so the research I did after watching that said that, like, James Cameron is a fan of this film, but more than that, when Arnie was cast, he said, go watch WestWorld and just watch the way Yul Brynner moves, and that should inform the way the Terminator moves. And I can see that totally. Just to go back there, yeah, so WestWorld, released 1973, starring, as we said, Yul Brynner, Richard Benjamin, James Brolin, your main cast, written and directed by Michael Crichton. That's right, that Michael Crichton, that you may have heard of and wrote sort of certain books such as Jurassic Park, or as we'd like to call it, WestWorld in a book form, and a lot of other things. So yeah, Michael Crichton, film director before a novelist, really.
Well, he had done Andromeda Strain, right?
Yes.
I think that was a novel first, and this was the first movie that he directed, and I had forgotten that he directed this before we slated to do it, because I always think of him as a novelist. But you're right. Also, Jurassic Park is just WestWorld with dinosaurs instead of robots.
Yeah, 100%. So, but the other thing I like about this film is the way it starts, the way it opens. Is you are introduced to it, and it sort of, to me, it felt a little bit RoboCop, because again, it's sort of, but it's done sincere. But it felt very sort of RoboCop. Is you have a guy there with his microphone, randomly interviewing people getting off the plane or getting off the hovercraft. It is actually just coming from Delos, which is the company or the place that's got the three worlds in it, and it's very cheesy and very sort of. I don't know if you were to watch it at the time, would you take it more with a bit more sincerity? But watching it this week, I was like, this feels almost like a parody of, that sort of. And you, sir, what do you think of what it is? Big cheesy grin. Oh, I thought it was wonderful. I've just been to Roman World. And I love that opening, especially when the camera turns and there's a big group of them and they're all like, yay! So.
I love that. Yeah, and I thought of RoboCop too. I mean, and you and I both love those sort of like in-universe advertisements and stuff.
Yes.
And that's one thing we both like about Starship Troopers. And yeah, I thought the same thing. And they even have that like slogan. What is it? It's like the vacation of your life or something.
Vacation of your dreams. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not as crisp as the RoboCop parodies. It's much more sort of like, you think it's almost like a news footage, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like an interview more than a commercial, but it is very tongue in cheek. And at the end, it's clear that it's promotional material.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, and apparently that was added after the rest of the movie was shot. That was like
Right.
a very late addition. But
Yeah.
it's such a brilliant way of, and then you cut to Westworld and you have sort of like the sound of technicians. And I
Mm.
think all of that is just really well done.
Yeah. It's just the first sort of 10 minutes of this film before you even get to Westworld. There's just something about I really enjoy. It's
Mhm.
very kitsch in some ways. And they're going for sort of weird like tones. Like they say, they moved from that to a pair of sunglasses mirroring, like mirrored sunglasses, reflecting the world, that this sort of barren desert disappearing underneath them and stuff. And it's very stark, and it's the way it's set up fills the screen, and then you realise that's the pilot of the hovercraft, and then it sort of passes back into the hovercraft, and it's like some sort of like it's like a 70s like lounge area where
Yeah.
people are all sat around, sort of like, yes, I'll have some of the Sincere before I port into Westworld, and that's where you get to meet your sort of your rogues gallery of characters. But I just love it. I just love the feel of it. That again, you get the information about what Delos is and the worlds, and you get to meet your characters. And Josh Brolin, James Brolin in this is just sort of like, he's so sort of. I don't know whether he's trying to play up the cool to his mate. He's like, I've brought my friend along to go to Westworld, and I'm just gonna play it really cool because I've seen this before. I get it. I can imagine the character of James Brolin being like the Richard Benjamin character the first time he came.
Mhm.
That sort of like, this is amazing. So I get a holster. I'm gonna get the ones with a string on. And,
Yeah.
and then James Brolin, and he's like, I had the ones without the string. Like, he's trying to play it cool, but I know you sort of just know that he was
Yeah.
awed by this the first time round, and so yeah, I love the beats of the first sort of 10 minutes.
Yeah, and when they come into Westworld or they come into Delos, the John, the
Mm.
Brolin character, you can see him smiling, and
Mm.
he sort of like he's like a kid. He like has played it so cool, but it's like, oh, we're really here. The one thing about him is through the whole movie, I have face blindness, but for the whole movie, I think, why is Christian Bale in this movie? Because Brolin looks like exactly like Christian Bale to me.
Yeah, no, he does actually. That's a really good point. Yeah, he is. The one thing I like about his character, actually, say, because he does play it completely cool at the beginning, and then you say when they're getting kitted up and they're putting on the clothes and stuff, like he's clearly excited, and then when he's in, at one point there's a shot of him and he's lying on a bed reading a cowboy like a dime store novel.
Yeah.
So he's just a fan. Like, he's clearly like a Western fan. So I think that's kind of cool as well. That like he's just, I'm living the dream here. Like, I get to do all the things I've seen John Wayne do and all that kind of thing. Um, and it's clearly that sort of like fantasy Hollywood version of the Wild West, as it is with the others. Like all the three worlds you have. Was it Western world, Roman world, and medieval world? And each one is a Hollywoodization of that. I mean, like, you clearly wouldn't want the real, true, authentic thing because it would be horrible. There's a reason we don't
Yeah.
still live like that.
Right, absolutely. Well, what's funny is and Crichton was apparently very conscious of this, and
Mm.
he was like, okay, even the way he shot all three worlds were based on different movies
Mm.
about those worlds. But what's funny is there's a lot of dialogue in the movie about how everything is historically accurate, and you're like, no,
Yeah.
no, that's not really what you're going for.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, actually, especially sort of now you mention it, and I think back to the way that medieval world in particular is shot. Definitely goes back to and the fight towards the end. It
Mhm.
feels very Errol Flynn and
Mhm.
those sort of
With the
medieval
jumping on
dramas.
tables.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point, and that's actually I like that because it brings that sort of thing to life. But there's some great bits. I mean, one of the things I like about this introduction is when you see the characters' reactions. So you have that husband and wife, And again, this comes to the gender politics of it, and they tell you about each of the worlds as they watch the introductory video, and it's quite clear that the husband's going off to medieval world, and the wife is going off to Roman world, and she's sort of like, they describe Roman world as a lustful something experience, and she's all like, ooh, and the husband's a bit like, I'm not sure how I'm feeling about this, but then for a fact, in fact, it's shown on screen the moment he gets to medieval world. He's off to do exactly the same thing. Like, there's adultery going on here. So,
he hits on the maid, as well as the queen. And there's that line in the opening of like, it's like the one thing she says about Roman world is like, I like the men, it's like so inarticulate,
Yeah. So I love there's a uniqueness to each of the worlds, not just the way they look, but the way they're shot. So they've definitely gone for, and so well done to Michael Crichton for that. Like, it's done so well I hadn't noticed it, but it's definitely there. But obviously the majority of the world, the vast majority of the films sits in WestWorld, and it's all played up, but you get the first thing, and I'll show my hands this thing just to prove, I'm human, is the only indicator that you get a character or an entity is human or not is the joints of the hand. And this idea that they haven't quite got that right, they can't seem to get that right, which is unusual. But it's a good little indicator that really only comes back once more later in the film.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very strange, isn't it? And I guess the only time that's really important is with the tech guy, as he's fleeing the gunslinger near the end. But aside of that, it's almost never used. And there are times, like with the maid, Daphne, who's tied up, and where you think you just took her hands off of the manacles.
Yeah.
You should have seen, right?
Well, there's two, because there's other scenes like that. Because the first time you see it is they go to the hotel. James Brolin and Richard Benjamin, they have to buy a room and this other stuff. And it's all very well done. And the guy who runs the hotel, you see his hands as he puts the money in his hand, and he's got the joints. And they actually explain it there and then. So you think, okay, this is going to come up again at some point down the line, in some way. And at one point they go to a brothel, and there's a massive punch up. Mm-hmm. And at some point I'm like, someone's gonna stop them, or someone's gonna stop a punch and go, whoa, look at my hands, don't punch me in the face. Nope. Never happens. Like, they could be throwing living people through windows, they could be doing all glassing people, and at one point I'm like, this could go very right, even without the robots. Mm-hmm. Going haywire. Like, I'm pretty sure the risk of people getting hurt is pretty high in Westworld in particular.
I mean, first of all, don't you want to go to Westworld though? I mean, it's so seductive. It's so, like the idea of being able to have a little bit of danger, but having this, robot snakes, that's awesome. But what you said, I thought about too, and I think it's there in the TV series too, that there are these kind of logical problems, and how do you keep the gun thing is the guns are programmed so they can't fire on another human. I don't know how that works, but okay, that's a safeguard, but you can't keep guests from punching other guests. Yeah. And I mean, I just keep thinking, like, what's the first thing that people are going to do? Like, they're being charged $1,000 a day, right? That's established. And it's just same thing in the TV show. There's a flat rate, right? So people are going to be like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm burning down the sheriff's. I'm going to burn down some buildings. I'm going to just, just destroy stuff. Start stabbing people. Knives don't work the way those guns work. Yeah. Guests are going to be burned and stabbed and mutilated and run over by carriages, if not by horses. I mean, it's very unbelievable that you could really keep the guests from getting injured.
Yeah. There's so much that could go wrong. I think you do, because at one point, like I say, watching this film, like I know that Yul Brynner, the gunslinger, is a robot.
Mhm.
Is the horse he's riding?
Mm.
I don't know. It's never addressed because you've had a robot snake, So is the horse real? If
Well-
it's not, that's a robot riding a real horse. Like that, there's some really.
No, the horses are robots because you see
Oh,
one being repaired.
That's true.
Remember,
Yes.
they take that one
Mm.
away, and the snake is a robot, and you do see, a horse being repaired. It's like sometimes it's funny. It looks like a paper mache horse in a few scenes, but so that actually makes me wonder. I mean, first of all, it might be cheaper to use real horses, but it makes me wonder, like, if all the robots have rebelled to the point of the snake biting him, why does Peter ride a horse out? And doesn't that
And
horse
gets away.
go like throw him into a ravine or something?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it should happen, shouldn't it? Yeah, as you said, there's some logic gaps in it, but it's like I said, the world itself I just like you say, logistically, the world would be too difficult to control. I mean, I'm sure, like I say, eventually there'd be ways of doing it. But I do love the idea of sort of this ability to go into a faux reality, this sort of fake reality, and then just live out a fantasy. I think it's quite telling as well that in the film, they keep leaning towards characters wanting to become the sheriff, as if they're sort of like noble good. They get the guy with the glasses who wants to become sheriff, and all I kept thinking is, if you're in the Wild West, no, you want to be an outlaw.
Yes.
Like, if you've been downtrodden in your life and you want to, no, you are becoming an outlaw and you are going to run roughshod over this world. That's what you're going to want to do.
That's something that like Jurassic Park can't get at because of the differences. That one of the things that fascinates me about WestWorld, and I've always liked this movie, is that it becomes a way to sort of play out fantasy and also play out character. And they get into this, I don't want to bring too much of the TV show into this. I certainly saw this years before, and I was super excited that they were going to do a reboot. But it does play out character that, and I know that's true of me too, right? Like, I mean, I would be like, well, these are robots. I'm burning some stuff down. I mean, people would go crazy even more so than is depicted in this movie. And I think that gets at, if you believe that that's true, that gets at this kind of like, Freudian interpretation that really society is repressing all of these, violent and sexual instincts. And really, when you give us carte blanche and you put us in this world where actions don't have consequences, the first thing we want to do is act out of this repression to engage in sex and violence and abuse.
Well, and this film shows that in multiple ways. I mean, the two obvious ones is, like you say, when Peter and John go to the brothel, they go and they pick out, or they're given these two robotic whores, and then all of a sudden, like, they're like, oh, all right, oh yeah, and all of a sudden a fight kicks out, and they're like, all right, well, we'll have a bit of a rumble first as well. So, like you say, just that wanton sex and violence is there for them at the sort of, and because there's a great bit of there's a, what is it, the bank's being robbed, and they end up missing it because they end up sleeping with these robots and sort of and it's be like, the idea is, well, we can catch that robbery tomorrow. We'll get to that sooner or later. But more so, I think, in medieval world, when you follow the guy around and you say he's sort of having an affair with the queen, and she says, no, I can't right now. I'm, the king is about to do whatever. So she sort of like spirits away, and he walks to the door and meets Daphne, and he's like, well, if I can't do her, I shall do this one instead. And then when she refuses him, because obviously that's the problem that's sort of being introduced. But when it goes back to the center, and we'll get back to this sort of the control center, and even they're confused. They're like, well, that's interesting. She's a sex model. Like, she's not supposed to refuse anybody. And so, yeah, you literally could wake up in the morning, but, oh, oh, what should I do today? Wanton violence and raping and pillaging. Like, I could do whatever I want.
Mhm.
And like, it's interesting. Off air, we were talking about something about the social contract, and because you live there, so you sort of live in a society and you live in a community, so you have an element of a social contract, and how much of that would apply when you rocked up to this world? Like, do you sign a waiver that says you can do whatever you want, but whatever you damage,
Mm.
we'll cover. You've got to pay for. And I'm like, well, if you're going to be shooting robots, then I don't think that really works. But
No, no, and I don't think that there is that sort of coverage. I mean, because you want to destroy things. I mean, that's the whole point, So yeah, I mean, there are some. I mean, I love this movie, and I love how short it is. I love that, like, you almost get like a series of vignettes. I love this sort of like classical, just good storytelling, right? Despite we'll get into even more problems, logical issues later on. But you were talking about Peter and John on the hovercraft going into Delos. That one is the first timer, one is the old timer, and that lets you get in the exposition, but it also lets you get a character and sort of like how you perceive this place. And then they get there, and I love that you sort of get like a series of vignettes. It's not really a plot per se. It's just like, we're going to have a series of vignettes of sort of like stuff you can do with this concept. And then you hit this, like, the first night where you see this eerie sort of surreal thing of these robots, all the dead robots being
collected up.
With electric lights and vehicles and stuff. And then you cut to the control center, and then really, like, the plot begins at that point. And then at the back end, you have like 30 minutes of, robots going wild and just destroying stuff. And it ends up focusing on the chase with Yul Brynner. But, that is so economical. It is so, I mean, if this were done today, not as a TV series, it'd be like a 3-hour-long movie.
Yeah.
I mean, think of how interminable, like, a modern disaster movie like 2012 is, right? Where it's just like, how many plots do you need? How many little, like, just nonsense do you need? I just love how well structured this is. Despite the, like, the hands thing is a problem. When he frees the Daphne, he gives her water to drink and she sort of fizzles out. That's not important. You think, oh, finally he's found the way to defeat Yul Brynner. That's just a random thing. There are problems here. But
the moment that happened, and I know this thing's in a desert, all right? And because it's set in a sort of, okay, so rain, probably not an issue. However, if it's going to electrify, they show Roman world's got a big pool. So I was like, surely that's a bit of a flaw. Then if they get wet, and not even a lot wet, just a bit wet, they're going to fuse out. I'm like, that's going to be a problem in one of these worlds.
Absolutely, and I mean, and that's one of the many things that when you. I mean, the concept is such a simple concept, and because you get in and get out, and there are many charming ideas and visuals along the way, it's inoffensive. At 3 hours, this is just a cluster F of a movie. But the water thing is a problem. How do they all not know anything about androids? Like, there's always this issue of like, what is the society around them like? If androids have progressed to the point where you can make an amusement park and reliably not have them murder people, clearly androids are everywhere, or at least not rare. Clearly, they have to be told, like, what an android is, basically. Another thing, like, you mentioned the, like, Roman world, or you mentioned medieval world, and how medieval world has, like, a plot that continues over multiple days. Yul Brynner is just like, he's shot every day, and they're just like, throw him back out there. I know the same guests are there. You just see the guy you shot yesterday, and he resurrects. How is that really what you wanted? I mean, and another thing that bothers me is I love all of the surreal stuff with the night and the lights and the androids on conveyor belts and stuff. I love all those visuals. But I always, every time I get to that, I think I have terrible insomnia. If I'm in Westworld, there's like, I got like 2 hours of sleep last night. There's no way I'm gonna get any sleep being in Westworld. I'm
Well,
gonna go out and murder people at night or something.
well, that's it. The thing I kept thinking is, I've never been on a holiday to any resort or anything that shuts down enough at night for, you'll probably see people doing some cleaning, but to have a van come in with electric lighting to remove bodies, I'm like, where is everybody? Why is this not busier? Yeah, it feels a little incongruous. It sort of feels a bit odd, but I love the idea that there is this thing. I mean, what it would be, I suppose, again, if you were going to do it, you'd have the big entertainment, wouldn't you? If this was going to be like a real resort, you'd have the people, you'd make sure there was enough indoor late night entertainment. You've got your burlesque or your can and your poker tables and all sort of stuff. So get everybody in, and then you'd probably have some way of getting the bodies off the streets. But it's just dead. It's just quiet. Like everybody's left and they come in. But it's a cool idea. It's just an easy.
Yeah.
It's a simple way to show that this thing's 24/7, I suppose, isn't it? That's the sort of the idea.
And I really love the visuals, especially because at that point you're like 40 minutes in or something. I mean, you've probably been in these worlds for about 30, something like that. And then at that point, these lights and that machine that coming in seems so industrial, and just that its geometry is so incongruous with everything you've seen. So I love the visuals. But yeah, they don't even need to do that, right? Because they could just have guys with carts and just be like, I'm here to collect the bodies, and like pour them in a mass grave, like whatever.
Taking them up to Boot Hill, or in the medieval world, like bring out your dead. I'm not quite dead yet. Yes, you are. There's an interesting way of doing it, I think. But I mean, the thing I love is, and again, the other film that this made me think of is, and I know they do it with the TV series, but Cabin in the Woods. Where they're in the cabin, then they keep going back, and they obviously release some sort of like version of some horror, on the cabin, and it turns out it's a sacrifice. And I think that owes something to this. Because I like the sort of when it goes back to the central hub, to sort of the lab or whatever you want to call it, the repair center. Crichton and even the cast, they're very good at making it feel completely different. Like, this is just a day in the job. You got the guy with the beard or the moustache who's going around, and he's like, okay, well that's this servo here, and you want to do that, and he's like, you want to use the XX60, and if you can't fit it in, just move this up in the cavity more, and they're just like, I wouldn't say authentic because it's all it's all techno babble, but you get the feel that like this guy's just done this on a daily basis. He's like, repairing this, repairing that. Oh, what's wrong with this one? And you see the gunslinger, and they're like, we're the nice nod where they're like, we're up in his basically his hearing and his sight is being upgraded. We're just taking the opportunity to do that. You're like, all right, fair enough, I'll buy that. But I do like that it sort of sits separate, but is obviously connected. I think it's done quite well, actually.
Yeah, and I think all three worlds plus the Delos Control Center, they all have a very different look. Like you never are confused where you're at. And I think that what struck me about exactly those same lines was how perfunctory it is. That you said like they do this every day. So much of what you've seen up until that point is selling the magic of Westworld, right? It's selling, this is this magical place. And then you peel behind the curtains, and it would be really easy just to be like, we're the Disney Imagineers, and we love our jobs, and we're, golly gee, I hope these people like it. And instead, it's just like, another day, another robot, just very cool.
I prefer that because it does make me think of Disney World, and not, we'll get to the TV show in the next couple of weeks, but that having the sort of like the eccentric genius at the center of it all, sort of, that Walt Disney-esque idea. But I do like the idea of when you see Disney World, or Disneyland or whatever, that you do see the Magic Castle, and you've got all the rides and the people in costumes, but you do know there's a security office, or several probably, with people just looking at monitors and going, it's all fine here, Jeff, right, we'll move this. or people getting in and out of styrofoam costumes and going like, "It's hot out there. Being Buzz Lightyear today has been awful."
Yeah, it's funny. I don't know. I mean, I love that it's cynical, but I think that everything I've read is like the people who work, especially wearing those costumes, are just diehard Disney people, right? Like, I
Yeah.
mean, they are just like, you do not stay at that job for longer than 6
Yeah.
months if you are not like, you have Mickey Mouse paraphernalia in your house, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I like that sort of like culty thing, and I mean, we're fascinated by amusement parks and by especially Disney, this sort of presentation of a sanitized, safe version of reality where you're kind of lulled into thinking like, well, there are corridors underneath all of this. There's security everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Nothing is going to happen. You're safe. As a kid, um, my brother and I, fell into the water at Disneyland, and we're like soaking wet, and people showed up and they whisked us away, and we were backstage, and like they're in enormous caverns, and but this idea of like stuff being hidden around you, and what you're seeing is like all this kind of like three-dimensional facade that's very carefully managed is at the same time alluring and also horrifying in a way.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I love the idea you say about giving in to the fantasy, that cult, like that's what going into one of these things is. I mean, it's a bit like, and I've done them before. When you go onto those Halloween horror nights, you'll go like do a zombie run or like some sort of themed ghost walk or something like that. Like, I know. Well, it depends who's doing them. To be fair, I'll tell you that story one day. But for a fact that like none of those people dressed as zombies are going to hurt you. They're not going to do anything. But like, my heart's still racing. I'm still reacting in the way of, like I'll get the fight or flight and all that sort of thing. And that's just a 4-minute walkthrough. And I'm given into it. Like, if you walked into one of this and it looked authentic, I mean, imagine medieval world if you rocked up to a massive castle and it had like a portcullis and it had like you walked in and there was all the people in like armor, and I'd be like, yeah, all right, I'm doing this. It's like some big role play. What do they call them? RPG kind of sort of
LARPing.
LARPing. Yeah, it's that kind of thing, like giving into the fantasy and going with the story. And I can imagine it being incredibly easy once you're in there.
Yeah, and I like at the beginning. I mean, the scene with Yul Brynner being introduced to the bar is a great example of this, and I think it's done really well, and especially sort of the looks back and forth between Peter and John as they're like, you're gonna do something about this, like, and you. About.
Yeah, I think Brynner, as you sort of said, he's quite comfortable in just coming in and being Brynner. but like, he may have just done it for the money. I don't know, but like, I don't know. There's something about the way he carries himself throughout this other film that it's just like it's very comfortable, and he's a bit like, yeah, I'm just doing this, and I'm just being me, and I'm enjoying. It's easy, and I'm enjoying it. And what is it he says? Because he bumps into Peter, and then
spilled your drink.
Yeah, get the
You're
man
sloppy
a bib.
with your drink.
Yeah, get the man a bib. He needs his mama. And I just love his line delivery at that point, because it's so sort of like sarky and sort of but I also love the fact that it's so orchestrated to instigate violence.
Mm-hmm.
Like the gunslinger is solely there to be shot. That's his purpose.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like the bank robbery. Like, apparently they Crichton edited a lot of this on the back end, and made it a lot shorter too. But apparently they had shot stuff of that bank robbery, and I think that like that bank robbery is another sort of like orchestrated moment where like, oh, we get to be the heroes and stop a bank
Mm.
robbery, right? I get to, kill the gunslinger, right? Who's being a dick to me at the bar. I mean, in a way, it's perfect for those characters because it's that moment where, it's like that Back to the Future moment where it's like, you yella, where
Yeah.
you gotta do something. And it lets, John sort of like, or Peter get past that sort of, loses Hyman, right? He gets
Yes.
past the sort of like, okay, I really can, I am safe killing these guys. I am safe acting out. But you do see his fear, and it's a very natural fear. It's like, this guy looks like a tough guy, right?
Yeah. Well, I love the fact when there's an interesting part to this is that because he asks several times, he's like, "Are you sure he's a robot?" Because there's a whole moment they give you the information again where they're like, "You can't kill a human. Like the gun has a sensor, as you say. So, because they're in the hotel room, he says, "Try to shoot me," and he does, and the gun just clicks. It doesn't work, so it refuses to fire. So, you can only shoot the androids. So you're comfortable with that, but that comes after the shooting. So there's a moment where he's done it, and he's like, "Did I shoot a guest? Did I shoot an android? Did I shoot an android?" Like you're not entirely sure at first. But there's also this thing. The John character has a comment when he asks about the guns. He says, you haven't killed anything," and you're right because the robot goes away, it gets repaired, and it literally gets wheeled out the next day. But there's still the thing like it still looks human. You have still drawn a weapon on, this humanoid character. Like to then remove all morality from that to say, "Oh, you haven't killed anything, you shot a robot." I'm like, yeah, but it still feels icky to me. I don't know. It feels uncomfortable. I'm not sure how I would feel. I think I would be like Peter. I'm like, I'm drawing a gun on something. I'm like, yeah, I want to be the badass that walks in, sort of like Yosemite Sam style, firing off the guns and doing everything. But there'd be a part of my head going like, I don't know how I would feel going away from this, fake or not, knowing that I was willing to draw on something that looked human, apart from some wrinkles in its hands.
Okay, so I mean, we at this point we've both talked about it. We've got to just stop the review and talk about Scott and Julian go to WestWorld. Okay,
Yes.
like you would you want to come out. I mean, I'd be like the John character. If anything, I'd be like, you would be worried about me. You would be like, Julian is a sociopath. I don't know if I can, spend time with him. I've had friends who, have watched going back to the good old days of GTA Vice City, who were like, why don't you do any missions? All you do is murder people. I'm very worried about your mental health. I would just be like, yeah, oh, so the gun doesn't work on people? All right, all good. Just go in, just bam, 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 holding people's head down to the bar and blowing their brains out. And you just be like horrified. So you would kind of, you want to do it, but you'd think there's a moral remainder for you.
I don't know. Maybe after a while I'd get past it. And I think it's like the thing that Peter has, that thing of like, can I really do this? Is it right? Because he is choosing to fire on the person over the spilling of a drink. And it's that thing of like, and again, we were sort of talking off air about sort of like, I'm relatively relaxed about stuff. And like, if he nudged me and then was like, he needs a bib, and I'd be like, yeah, mate, you're probably right. I'll get another one in. And I'd leave it at that. That would just be my like, oh, well, move on. But that, it's the fact that John's going, no. Shoot him in the face. Shoot him. And I can see that, like, I think I would be like the Peter. I'm like, oh, yeah, no, I'm here to do that, aren't I? Actually, that's what this is about. I don't know. I weirdly think, like, because I did think about this. Which world would I be more at home in? Like, would I be more at home at Westworld or Medieval World? And I did think I'd end up in Westworld because I looked at this thing, and again, you watch the film, and the sort of, with medieval world and Roman world, you're back to swords and knives, and I was like, shooting someone with a gun that I know can't kill a human is one thing. Wielding around a broadsword and going all Conan on someone was a different matter entirely. Even as a robot, I mean, the damage some of the swords must do to the droids, but yeah, I don't know. It just sort of it felt odd to me. I wonder if this does come down to the, not to say that you're a gun nut, but like to the gun culture.
You're like, you are an American, so you are always one situation away from being a sociopath anyway, in fairness.
This is where you pull out an AR-15 from under the desk and you're like, yep. I have held and fired a gun when I was in Texas, years and years ago. And that's it. And like, I have no experience of seeing guns other than probably on the police in this country. And so that thought of just being handed a weapon and being like, "Oh, nuts!"
Well, that might be some of the reluctance. I mean, in fairness, I think the majority of Americans have never fired a gun in their lives. I am not a gun owner myself, and I don't like gun culture. And I've been to gun shows with people, and I don't like the culture. But I'll tell you, I've fired machine guns. I have fired, like the heavy mounted guns on the back of G.I. Joe vehicles. I fired that stuff. It's fun. It's fun. The problem is in real life that chews through bodies. I mean, I live in a country in which, every week there's another mass shooting. And there are school kids with, exit wounds, that are 5 inches wide by some of these rounds. That's crazy. That's horrifying. I don't want to live in that culture. But put me in Westworld. Yeah, absolutely.
I think maybe the comparison to a computer game is probably apt. Mm-hmm. Especially when you say like GTA or one of those open world kind of games is probably apt, because I've played those and I'm not a big gamer, but like I've played those games, and you do, if you can go off and even you're driving the car and you go, oh, you've got to get from this point to that point. Yeah, I'm still going to do it and probably run some people over and smash up property and all this other stuff that you can get away with. And I can't remember, probably the last one I played was if you got 5 stars or you got 5 points, or like a helicopter came after you and all this other stuff. And there's a joy to be had in that, like in the wanton destruction. And so I probably would get over it relatively quickly. But I think, I think, like you say, it would be that losing your sort of like your virginity to the environment, accepting the fantasy. That's the thing. It's being accepted fantasy. I'd accept the fantasy and up to a point, and then I think you've just got to keep indulging it, haven't you? Really, that's the point.
Do you deliberately run people over? Do you aim for them?
Probably at times, yeah. Not in real cars. I'm not saying I drive down country roads.
No, I'm not asking you in real life. You're like, hey, have you ever run somebody over and just buried their body in the field by your car? We've all been there. Well, I mean, look, I love carnage so much that I have lost missions repeatedly in GTA games because I see a motorcyclist and I just want to run him into the guardrail and see his body go flying. I love driving around beaches and just running people down. Look, I mean, it's fantasy. I would never do that in real life. And in real life, it's a lot messier. I mean, this is one reason why I object to violence in movies and in, comics and video games not being, bloodier. You don't see veins and blood and bone, and people screaming and people walking around dazed and confused, with part of their head missing, which unfortunately is something I've seen in real life. But yeah, it's not fun. But Westworld presents this kind of sanitized thing. But I think what's interesting is that this idea of fantasy of like getting into it, and you're saying like once you get into it, then your worst instincts will come out, right?
Yeah,
Like,
I think there's to me, and again, I think we've talked about this being my British conservatism, my British repression, where I'd be like, no, I'm fine, thank you. Thank you for the gun and everything, but I'll wait until the right moment to fire it. Once I've fired it once, I would probably change and become sort of like like you say, Biff Tannen, Mad Dog Tannen sort of style. Um, yeah, there would be a change. But it is. I can see why people give into. I can see why things like LARPing, and these um, zombie runs and all these other things. Like I can see why they work, because if you give in to the fantasy and you let that fantasy work for you, then it becomes that becomes the reality. And I think if you can then you adjust to the norms of that reality and you go, and I think you see that Peter does that.
mhm.
The sleeping with the robot and then the killing the first time he shoots like Yul Brynner is basically adjusting to that reality where you're like going, no, these things are fine here. Like go nuts. Like this is where you do that. That's the real world over there. Yeah, you don't do that there, but in the confines of Westworld, you're fine. And I almost get the feeling again, like we said before, that John probably went through something similar the first time he came, but now he's coming back and he's all cool and he's brought his friend Pete and he's like, yeah, look, no, this is what you can do, this is what you can get away with, and that sort of thing, and get used to it because it's that sort of thing of bringing somebody in from the outside, isn't it? But yeah, I don't know. I like that. I like the fact that he doesn't just walk in and is straight away sort of like gunning people down. It's sort of like he's the one, the newcomer.
Yeah. Yeah, no, my personal character would not make a very good story. Yep, got it. Time to massacre.
Yeah.
No, I mean, two things come up about that. One is that, like, I thought about like when they go back to the outside world, are they better people or worse? Like, are you better because you have had this outlet for these things, and then you're like, look, I'm a family man. I mean, as much of a sort of like sham as that guy who goes to medieval world, his marriage is, he's, is he going to be more likely or less likely to cheat on the outside? I don't know. I mean, and this goes back to the classic sort of like, does indulgence lead to more indulgence, or is that rather an outlet for our violent tendencies that then we're less violent?
Basically, is it a catharsis? Is this sort of like them release? I don't know, and they sort of try and sell it that way a little bit, don't they? That this is, I mean, are they one step away from the purge? Is that what we're saying? Westworld didn't work, so we're gonna have one day a year where you can kill everyone.
Well, there's going to be like Westworld psychosis in the DRM, which is like, in a world where like you believe that you're still in Westworld.
Yeah. Yeah, do they need to be? I mean, is there a certain amount as a guest? Like you can only stay for so long. You're only allowed to stay for 5 days because beyond that, you start to get a little bit too comfortable in that world. But I can imagine there are people that are addicted to this thing. Like we said about Disney World, like people that go Disney World like every year are really committed to that. I can imagine people saving up every year. I'm going to Medieval World. I am so into that world that like that's it. I've given up all my I don't save for anything else. I just go to Westworld for 5 days a year.
Yeah, why vacation anywhere else? I mean, $1,000 back then was real money.
Yeah,
but nowadays $1,000 a day on a vacation is not that big of a deal. Yeah, the other thing about that I was going to say was about when it goes bad, right? And when Peter sees John get shot by the gunslinger, and John is just like, I'm shot, and then he is shot again and he falls over. There's clearly a moment of just abject horror on Peter's face. And Peter, even when he's running, I mean, look, this is 70s. It's relatively low budget. These are these. How can I put this? The stunts in this do not look the most slick, well coordinated.
Yeah.
Right. But even so, Peter, when he's running, he looks like just a guy running.
Yeah.
His confidence has left him. And there is this moment, getting back to what you were saying, where, like, it's a fantasy. Do you get addicted? Do you go into this? Maybe, but when that fantasy is broken, it's crystal clear. It's like, yeah, I know this is a fantasy. Even if I've lost myself in it, I know it's still a video game.
Yeah.
The PlayStation turned off.
Because, I mean, that's the argument, isn't it? When everyone says these things about, like, violence in films and comics and get computer games, is that thing of like, oh, the fantasy sort of like populate, seeps into the real world. And you go, no, I'm quite clear of the distinction between real and the real reality and computer reality. And I do like that moment because it's such a sort of they're coming back from the barroom brawl and drink up, so they've got a hangover. They're probably feeling bruised from the fight before, and they see the Yul Brynner, and they're just like, and they literally say like, "Oh, not you again! Like, can we just leave this? Like, well, I'm done with this." But again, to me, that sort of thing would break the reality because I'm like, I've shot you twice now, and even the fact that we'll get on to the fact that like Brynner comes back whilst his programming is fine. To seek revenge is interesting. But yeah, that moment when John is shot and he sort of James Brolin plays it really well because he sort of laughs. Even he's a bit like, I'm shot. This is supposed to, like, he's genuinely surprised and not sure what to do with himself. And then when the second bullet hits, like you say, Peter's just like, oh yeah, shit just got real. Like this is
it's not fun anymore.
No.
I mean, in that moment, you clearly see just sort of like all the fun is gone. That veil of safety has been pierced in a catastrophic way. And I think that's well done. I think that is accurate, right?
Yeah. The one thing I'd say is, though, like I say, is about this fact of this fantasy is they have the gunfight in the bar, and then the following day, the gunslinger comes back and hunts them down to their hotel room and holds John up, and obviously Pete comes in with his towel on, all this other stuff. He does the heroic thing, and it's typical Western of Yul Brynner gets shot out the window. But to me, I'm like, I get that they're building up the character, but it would break that reality of, is this the only gunslinger they've got in town? Like, he has to go in every night to be prepared to come out and be shot again the next day.
Right. Well, this gets to, more of these kind of like logical problems. Like, it is like, as you say, I mean, I like it as a viewer. It is haunting to think of like, you killed me, like I want my revenge. And even though the robots aren't really characters in this movie, I mean, they are in the TV show, but you still feel sorry for him. I feel bad for this guy, as they take his face off, which, again, brilliant visual. I love the visual, the WestWorld face removal. But as you see him repaired and you see him laid out, you feel sorry for this guy who just exists to be killed over and over again. So I love the idea, but it is a logical problem because they clearly show, like with Daphne, they were watching her say no and slap a guy rather than, have sex. And they're like, she's got to submit, let's pull her in. That's a big problem. Yet they don't see Yul Brynner clearly angry about having been murdered the previous day. So that must be permissible? I mean, is that supposed to happen?
No, and that was the thing. So I was trying to find, when watching it this time, I was looking for the indicators of programming problems. Because I also have the question of like, how much artificial intelligence do these androids have? Like, how much is programming and how much is a level of sentience that they've got? But I was looking for the points in the film of, like, where they start to drip feed that the machines are going wrong. Like, you have Daphne is a clear one. Like, that's the real indicator. But like I say, there's very little else. They have the snake later on when he's escaped from prison, which is another one that, a snake's bitten a guest. But I'm still confused as to, is the gunslinger coming back the next day to their hotel room? Is that a mistake? Is it a problem? No, is it the programming gone haywire at that point, or is that, is that intentional? It could go either way. But the fact that, like, it seems to remember the fact that it's got a grudge against these two people seems to me to say, no, this is a problem.
Yeah, and I think that this, it's interesting. I'm thinking about, the concept in the literary theory of sort of like strong misreading, that you're pointing out an ambiguity and a problem with the original. And I would also add, if what you want is not for the dead to rise again every day, you shouldn't be putting him out there while, those guests are still here, which then gets at, like, how long can you stay? If you stay long enough, do you start seeing people? I mean, there are lots of logical issues there. But clearly there is this issue of, should they remember and should they return like this? And I think that the TV series then looks at that and says, remembering, like, your guest experience should be everybody has their role. You shoot a guy, he's dead. He doesn't come back and remember, like, didn't you shoot me? That doesn't work. That breaks the illusion. So then them remembering is in fact part of that malfunction. And that also allows them to remember their abuse. Here, it's not clear that their abuse is really related to the malfunction and the rebellion at all. You just get, I do like this kind of like cascading malfunctions, that the dialogue about this. And in a movie that is filled with, like, that technology, like most movies in the 70s, has not aged well. I mean, Star Wars has not aged well either, in terms of its technology. But it's not just the old computers, the reel-to-reel tapes, right? The part that I like the best is smoking in the control room. Like, the ashtrays are the most incongruous to me. But also, like, the digital eyesight. This was the first movie to do that pixelation. But it's like, wow, that resolution is like 64 by 64. Like, that's an Apple IIe, what his eyes are like.
There's a bit. I was supposed to say, there's a great bit when he's aiming the rifle at Peter, and Peter's on the sort of going over a sort of the ridge of a mountain. And he's aiming, and you see the digitalized, the pixelated version, and I'm like, I can't see him through this. How the hell are you aiming? Like, it's dreadful. It's a great gimmick, and I love the fact they've done it. But I'm like, this doesn't seem like an upgrade. And the fact they give him, like, heat sensor later on, heat vision, clearly that was then replicated for the Terminator. This whole thing of the digital vision is, again, replicated for the Terminator and done better. Like, they've sort of fixed it. But I love this idea they do, this seeing from the POV of the gunslinger. I think it's fantastic. Sorry, I was interrupting what you're saying.
No, and it's really well done for the time, right? For 73. But but all of that stuff doesn't age well. The best line in this, from a technological standpoint, is the line about them malfunctioning, where the scientist says, some of these were built by computers. We don't really know how they work. So the idea is, like, I mean, and that is just, unfortunately, he says some. Clearly, this is like a throwaway line that's intended to justify, hey, we're not going to give you a whole lot about what we think is happening with this malfunction. But I love the idea, and I think it's quite accurate that some sort of AI is, designing these robots. They're going to do a better job than humans are. And, as a result, though, we don't really know a lot of how they function. This is beyond us. I mean, we currently have AIs that, that do this, that say, pick a stock, and you say, there's no indication that stock is going to go up. Why are you picking that? You cannot find a reason. And you can poke through the code, and you're just like, I mean, it would take you a year to just figure out why it made that decision, but damned if it wasn't right.
Yeah.
How did it know that? It's not that it's magical. It's just that it's the ability of us to analyze it organically is very limited. And I think that is, from a technological standpoint, like such a standout good line in a movie that does not age well from a technological standpoint.
No, I agree. What I would say ages well, though, is because I agree with the technological stuff, is very sort of its era. It still looks good. I love a reel to reel. When I see them on film, like I must admit, this it's just a good visual. Like I love them, and I kind of miss, seeing those banks of computers with the lights on and the reel to like. I love all that, and so now when they're like, we've got this supercomputer and it's the size of a phone, and you're like, oh. Well, that's really disappointing. Like, I don't care. I want to see this huge banks of computers. But yeah, so that's I love seeing that stuff. But the one thing I don't think has aged at all, and I think it's still relevant, is the approach that they take in the conversation of how are they going to deal with the guests. So there's a bunch of sort of scientists and park owners there, and they're very much like, right, we've identified that there's this problem. Like, if I think they've had at that point the snake has bitten John, and you've had that first indicator of the problems. We've had the indicators of the problem, and they're a bit like, okay, we've had this, and someone says we should shut down the park for a month. Or let's put this down: we'll go into lockdown for a month. All right, let's call it that. And the others go, oh, I'm not sure about that. Because they say, like, let's evacuate, send everyone home, and we'll shut down for a month, and we'll look at everything. That was what the first guy sort of says. And then another guy says, whoa, let's just not accept any more guests. We'll say we're at capacity, and we'll refuse any more guests. But those that are here, we'll just deal with it. And even in my head, I'm thinking, that's exactly what would happen.
Yes.
What is the minimal viable way of handling this situation? Right, what will damage us if we send everybody home because of a snake bite? Right, that's damaging Delos. That's it. Like, we may not be done, but there's a lot of work to get that back up to this level again. And then when they go, right, well, we're not accepting any more. All right, everyone goes, oh yeah, I'm happy with that. And you totally see that there's a business mind behind that, and that's it for me watching it, especially now in this day and age. It's almost like that everyone's been making the comparison with the mayor from Jaws during COVID, that sort of like the beaches will stay open and the sharks there, and I think that's an apt comparison. But I also now think Westworld is just as apt. Where they're just like, well, we won't let anybody else go, especially for England, where we're like, well, we won't let anybody else in. They'll be fine. But this group of people, yeah, we'll just try and handle it, we'll give them a minimal tiered system, something like that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, over here, we have states that don't even require masks to this day. Yeah. And just like, just, it'll be okay. Do the minimum so we can say we're doing something. But,
Sorry, just say the minimum, because I think you say they do the minimum. They definitely do the minimum, because in both, you don't see much of Roman world, which I think is a real flaw in this film that we'll get onto. But in both Westworld and medieval world, not only have they identified that there's a bugging in the system, there's a clear problem with the programming. You've seen a snake attack someone, and then a sex android has refused, to the seductions of a guest. They then send 2 robots that are clearly designed for combat back into the arena. And I'm like,
Yeah.
even I'm thinking that's a bad idea.
Well, and the thing that they don't really mention, I mean, you mentioned the sort of like the sexual politics of this. The thing that they don't mention about Daphne is that she slapped him.
Yeah.
That should probably be a bigger issue for you as running this park than that she said no, right?
Yeah.
Like his penis will survive, okay?
Yeah.
You know that about men, right? But um, injuring a guest and deliberately doing so, that should probably be a bigger deal. Yeah, I mean, Crichton, just about this point, sort of like doing the minimum, Crichton intended this as a metaphor for corporate greed. And, I think, I mean, I live in a country, and, you do too, to maybe a lesser degree, where there are a lot of people who think corporations have the best answers to things, right? Like, why should government do it? Let's farm it out. Corporations do it better, and a lot of people have a bullshit idea of how terrible government is over here. And that sometimes can be true, right? But the flip side is this is the corporate mentality, right?
Yeah.
Like when BP had that oil spill, yeah, there was no plan whatsoever to deal with it. I mean, this stuff happens all the time. There's certainly a lot of good corporate players who do have contingency plans and are concerned about their reputation. But there are a lot of people who would function exactly like this, if not worse.
Yes.
And yeah, so I think you're absolutely right to isolate on that. It does strike me as dead on.
Yeah. And I say, of all the things that haven't changed, like this is 73, we are almost 50 years on from this film. Still the same. It's still very much the same. And so that scene really did hit home when they were
50 years on, the park would malfunction, and then the government would give Delos a defense contract. That's where we're at right now. So.
Yeah. You can't run a park, but can you provide PPE?
Well, the thing about your park is once they went crazy, I'm not saying it was good that you murdered all those people, but once they went crazy, those robots were good at killing people, and we can think of some uses for that. Can we drop some of those WestWorld gunslingers in Baghdad?
Well, the thing is, they touch on that in Jurassic World. So, extending the Crichton sort of world, less so and I think corporate greed is definitely a part of Jurassic Park in the book as well as in the film. When you read the book, the character of John Hammond is less the sort of the fuzzy grandfather that Richard Attenborough brings to the screen. But they do that in Jurassic World, this idea that they have the Vincent D'Onofrio characters there with the raptors going, do you know what? These could do some damage in a cave system in the Middle East,
Yeah.
And people have sort of gone, oh, that's a terrible, that wouldn't happen. Whenever I've seen it, I've gone, no. If we were to perfect gene splicing and cloning in this way, oh no, don't kid yourself. Like they would be all over it in some capacity for this. So, yeah, no, I definitely think that's the case. I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, I do too. You said that you felt, I want to get back to this point you brought up about medieval world and how we don't see enough of it. And I personally suspect that we don't see as much of medieval world and Roman world because of, among other things, the sword problem, that guns, I mean, it's the point about like the bar fight, that if you've actually got bladed weapons swinging around, guests are going to hurt other guests. How do you get a, what do you have, a sword that knows not to be sharp when it hits a human?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like, you can't program the weapon. You'd have to program the android to miss or to be slower or to hit softer. I don't know. The thing is, with the worlds, two of them are set up with combat at their heart. WestWorld, you think of the Wild West, and the first thing you think about is gunfights. That's the straight away. That's what you go to. You think of European medieval world, and again, you go straight to knights, fighting in armor with swords or jousting and that sort of thing. Like you go to combat. When you go to Roman world, you know, I think gladiatorial. When I think combat, I think okay, gladiatorial combat or conquering when you're in the soldiers in the army. But then when I think back, when I think of Roman, as in the Roman Empire, as what it would have been for most people, that wouldn't be the fantasy Hollywood version they would give you. You know, you're thinking of like, I don't know, like what's it, Cleopatra, kind of. Well, that's in Egypt, I know, but like, yeah, that sort of like Mark Antony and Cleopatra kind of Hollywood fantasy. I don't think that that's based more around sex, isn't it? And so I also think that one of the problems they may have had with Roman World is trying to give it a context that they could have got past the NPR, the censors. Yeah, because it's clear that Roman World, even from the very beginning of the film, where they call it the lustful, sensuous, lustful experience, like, oh, that's where the ladies go for the men.
Yeah, that strikes me as a little odd. I mean, I have to say, personally, medieval world seems the dumbest to me. I mean, you know, I love touring castles as much as the next guy, but I love to live in one today. But I really don't want to live in, you know, dank, you know, castles being served porridge all the time. You know, watching people in clunky armor. Roman world, I mean, yeah, it's also like I imagine, you know, like Mark Antony sitting and eating grapes, right? It's Caligula. It's like gluttony is part of it too. But it's like, you know, having servants fan you, you know, there is a sensuousness to that goes beyond maybe just the sexual. But you wouldn't think that's like, why would women prefer that? I mean, there is a sort of weird statement that this film is making that sort of like men want that valor of the medieval world, and they want to get the queen, and I don't know that that's true.
No, it does. They definitely portray Roman world as being the more feminine, you know, of the worlds. We've built this for the ladies, kind of thing. However, when it does go pear-shaped at the end, when it cuts to those other worlds, Roman world is an absolute bloodbath. Of all the worlds, that's the one that looks the worst. Like, you've got a guy in a toga being bent over and knifed in the stomach by somebody else, and I'm like, wait a minute, like that, like you said with the knives, that world's gone gone the furthest in the sort of that fall, really, because the others seem to be set up for combat, so you might be able to defend yourself at least.
Yeah, I mean, but you know, you can imagine that that's how it would be, right? You know, all these slaves, you know, servicing Roman nobles in Roman villas or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, time for the slave uprising. You know, Spartacus.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, and maybe, you know, maybe that's what they were intending. I don't know, but it is interesting, because the other thing I was thinking about from that point of view, again, is when John and Peter, they sleep with those female sex bots, sex droids. That's what they are, and there's no hang up with that. You know, and I know there are certain,
like, what do you mean though?
Basically they are, you know, the autonomous sex toys. They're not sleeping with women, but you know, it's sort of, yes, I know there are certain sex toys available today. You know, like there's sex dolls, and I know there's the realistic looking dolls and all that sort of thing. But you'd think there'd be more of a, I'm sleeping with a robot. You know, like it's almost like stigma's probably the wrong word, but like, have they got past that then? That, like, you know, but again, like you say, when we've talked about this in the past, really, like with Priss in like Blade Runner, you know, like she's a very different kind of droid because they're a bit more biological, but there's still this notion of like, they're not human. I can imagine if this is the case, there must be some sort of like Christian right group out there that's going, you know, sort of like, who will think of the children, and how, you know, the morality of these things. I don't know. It just feels like, I say, that when you think of the wider world, have they worked past this notion of, you know, for want of a better phrase, yeah, I'm fucking a robot.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I mean, this takes place in 1983, far-flung 1983. Where I remember 1983, where we had those sex bots, which actually is the only reason I haven't killed myself. I'm just waiting for the sex bots to come out. No, I mean, I know what you're saying. Like, is there a hang up about having sex with something that's inorganic?
Yeah.
And it almost feels like the hang up that we do see is sort of with that couple that he goes off to medieval world and she goes off, and there is a sort of like concern of her going to Roman world, and then he cheats. That seems to be more the hang up. Like, what is this? Is this cheating, right? Or is this the same thing as a vibrator, morally? And it seems that seems to be what the movie is saying. Like you said, you would feel shooting somebody who looks human, like, okay. I mean, certainly people would feel like I'm cheating, right? And have to have their buddy say, no, you're not. It's just a vibrator, that looks human. What I think is funny is, what I think strikes me most about that sequence is how 1970s it is. It's so amazing how much body types have changed, how much our sexual imagery has changed. You see, like, I mean, if you watch something like, even something later like Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, you think, how are these people going to find clients today? The standards of beauty, and they have the sort of like puffy. First of all, they're blonde. There's less of a stereotype today of beauty, but it's that puffy hair, and they're not as waifish as I mean, if you look at like Marilyn Monroe, she wouldn't have a career today.
No.
She was more full figured.
Well, these are what, 5-6 years beyond Barbarella.
Yeah.
It's a very, like you say, it's a very similar image, that blonde, curvaceous sort of, like, like you say, weirdly, I would say a healthier, sexual body image than we have today. But yeah, it does feel very 70s. The way it sort of the titillation of it as well. It's
well, there's that scene where she takes her top off, and it's shot from behind, so you don't see it, right? It seems so repressed, and that's also like such a stereotypical shot, right? Crichton is, using these stereotypical shots, like falling out the window and in slow motion.
But it feels. Yeah, but it feels like a Western. Like when they, like you said, and I think that's what's good. And the more I think about it, the more appropriate it feels. Like when it's shot in WestWorld, it feels like a Western. And I can't imagine there being a Western where, a brothel's prostitutes, you would see her boobs in a John Wayne film or an Eastwood film or something. Like there'd be that thing of like the revealing it to the cowboy and then cutting away. Like that would be the titillation. And so, and also, like I said, the moment he goes out the window, the fact it hits slow mo as he sort of like back rolls down the roof and stuff is very. That feels very Western. So, yeah, it definitely feels of its era, of its period.
Yeah, for sure. It does feel very repressed to me. The idea that you wouldn't show the breasts. I mean, but I feel that way watching old movies too. I think, you gun somebody down. Why you can't show human anatomy and you got to cut to him smiling the next morning or something, Well,
like, this comes to the nub of it, doesn't it? Violence is okay, sex isn't. Sex is immoral, but violence is perfectly acceptable to see people gunned down in the street. again, one of the things to say that about that again is when it goes pear shaped at the end, and the virus or whatever it is that sort of takes hold. And it's again one of the things I do like is it's never fully explained. Like, is this a computer virus or is it new programming? Are they fighting against their programming? Whatever. When it does go sort of wrong, like it goes wrong, like really wrong. And I like the depictions of that. That one of the instant responses is to lock down the control center, and then when they lock it down, they're like, "Oh, now we've lost control of the doors, so we're sort of trapped in here." Like, so it's not just going wrong out there. This is one of the interesting things about this. This isn't like there's no hero in this that's in the control center frantically tapping away on their Unix system looking for the right folder to reboot the system. Like, no,
like airport, right? The guy in the control tower.
Yeah, or even in Jurassic Park, if you're going to use that comparison, like they get to the control center, Dennis Nedry leaves them to it, but you've luckily got Christ, the girl, but you get the girl who sort of knows, she's a hacker because that was in the 90s. Is able to save the system, save the day. There's none of that in this film. Like, when it goes wrong, everyone's a bit like, yeah, no, it's gone wrong. Like, I'm trying, but like, right, we've got to lock down the doors. Okay, we can't breathe in here without the doors being open. Open them up. I can't. We're completely locked out of the system, and so it goes wrong everywhere. And so, to me, when I see that, because I'm not used to that, I'm used to seeing like an out, whether it be a Deus Ex Machina or whatever. There's usually a way out. There's not. So when Pete runs, and especially when he comes across that mechanic and stuff, and you're watching the violence play out across these other worlds, there's no one coming to save him, and that feels, I like that. That it is. It's you said about the horror. Like, yeah, there's no one coming to save him. He is alone in this. He is literally being hunted by this thing, and there is no one that's going to go like, all computers stop. There's no saving of this at this point. Because even if the one thing I say at the end of this film, the one thing I think he beats. Because the one thing is there is a Deus Ex Machina. They've only got a limited power source, and they're off grid, right. So they're all got a limited power source. But you don't know how long that is. So the moment he kills or he beats the gunslinger, like you're still not sure he's safe.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and he beats him really like 3 times.
Yeah.
But really. Your interpretation is that at the end, where we see the blackened, burned up gunslinger, and he falls without a face, that he's run out of charge right then, as he's menacing him.
But basically, it's almost the way I read it was everything that's happened to him, like the acid in his face, and then he gets burnt, and then he falls off the high stairs. Like, basically, the unit has just taken enough of a beating that it's gone like, yeah, we're beyond repair. And it just sort of breaks. It's that's hit its durability limit at that point, really.
Yeah, that's how I interpret it too. So I mean, for me, I would say like that Deus Ex Machina of running out of charge is never used. That's not how he gets away from it. And it's interesting, they have this line of dialogue where they're like, the charge could be an hour or it could be 12. And when you see Roman world, all the robots are clearly the gunslinger is the only active robot in all of this, including medieval world. I love seeing, it's a minor thing, but seeing the Queen and the Black Knight on the throne as if like, what does it mean to have conquered the world, to not be able to enjoy it. But the control room thing, I'm kind of irritated by the air conditioning, the suffocation thing. Like, do you really, have you designed the system to require electricity to not suffocate in a room? That seems ridiculous to me. But I hadn't thought about the point you're making that there really is no good guy in this movie. And it's not just that there's no rescue. I mean, even Peter, who's as good as this movie has to a protagonist, is not noble at all.
No.
There's no heroics. I mean, he just decides, I'm going to save myself. And I mean, the closest to a heroic moment is when he talks to the Delos guy in the cart, and the Delos guy is like, yeah, there's nothing you can do. He's going to hunt you down and kill you. The Delos guy, he should say, like, well, he's going to run out of charge at some point. Instead, he basically does the, like, I thought of, it's the guy from the future in Terminator who's just like, yeah, you don't trust me. You can't. You have to eliminate.
He will
a
not
T800.
stop. You cannot reason with him. You cannot bargain with him. He just will not stop. He basically, but like with like any panicky employee, I like the fact there's a technician because he admits that he's there to fix the robots, and I like the fact there's almost like an employee panic there of like, I hope I don't lose my job. Yeah, I know it's my job to fix these things, but I'm not responsible for this. This is bigger than me. But
it's then that Peter says, like, no, I'm not going to give up. And that's as close as you have to like a heroic moment in this whole movie, which is awesome.
It is, yeah. What's interesting is usually there's like a build up, isn't there? There's like an arc of like you say, by the end of the film, he's the badass. He's gone from being the wimpy kid to the badass by the end because of that learning of things. But it never, like I say, that never really happens. He has the moment where he bursts in his towel and shoots the Yul Brynner, the gunslinger, out the window. But even then, that's not like, it's play acting. Like, at that point, he didn't feel like he was under threat. Like, he kicks the door in and he feels he's understood that it's robots. Like I say, the fantasy is within its parameters. So he's still, it's not a wholly heroic moment. And that thing of just saying surviving is, like I say, it's as close as you get to heroic, because it's not even really heroic. It's just being stroppy or stubborn, isn't it, really? It's like, no, I'm going to survive and I'm going to do this. The fact of the matter is, though, they don't team up. Because the Delos employee is a bit like, yeah, you're screwed. Like, he is coming for you and he will not stop. And like, I can fix these androids, but I'm not going to try and get between him and you. So like, even the Delos employees, like, you're on your own. Like, there's no jump in the car. It will be quicker on this cart than it is on the horse.
Yeah.
Or
right.
I know a way back to the bunker where we can do something about this. That would be the new film if this was remade. That meeting would happen. They would team up, and then it would be them two racing against the clock to get to, I don't know, flicking a switch, doing something to, or Peter would then be the defender of the Delos employee. He would be the cargo, and he'd have to get him across somewhere. Oh, I've got to get to this place in medieval world or Roman world to flip this switch. If I can get this key to that place, all the robots will switch off and we'll be safe. But yeah, no, he doesn't. He's just like, yeah, you're screwed. I'm off.
Yeah, and what is the point of the Delos guy, right? I mean, he's just there to say, no, you're really screwed.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no plot point to him. And yet it's kind of, I love that he's there because it is just this sense of chaos of sort of like everything is out of control. It's every man for himself, But it is a way of sort of like ratcheting up the stakes.
Yes.
And also having the gunslinger kill somebody else.
Yeah.
Because you don't have that many characters to kill. So
yeah, I think that's exactly what it is. It's just establishing the stakes, isn't it? Like, we know what this is, and this is how much trouble you are in, is really what it's for. But like I said, I also like the fact, it's another kill. But I also like you say that it's about this chaos. It's a breakdown of the rules. You've seen already the care they take. Yes, there's some logic gaps on it, but the care they take to come out at the dead of night, to be as quiet as possible, take away the bodies, and then disappear. Like, you are not supposed to, when you're in the fantasy, you're not supposed to see Delos at all. He's separate from you. And the fact this guy's just sort of like tugging along in a cart, and he has no care that he's come across an employee. Like, if you go back to Disney idea, like, if you were to turn a corner and find someone in a big styrofoam costume without their Mickey Mouse head on, there would be hell to pay.
Yeah.
This isn't as bad as that, but like, it's a similar thing where all of a sudden they're out in the open and you're like, oh no, things have gone
as bad as that, right? I mean, this is exactly the same thing. I mean, this is somebody whose job it is to never be seen.
Yeah. And all of a sudden he's like, I don't care. It's gone that bad that I'm just doing my best to get out of the way.
Yeah, that's a good point. That even his appearance is just a visual sign that all bets are off.
Yeah. Yeah, no, as you said, every man for himself. Like, the rules of this fantasy no longer apply, and so I do like that it is that sort of like and then it breaks down further because it allows you to break it further then for Pete to then enter the laboratory or the tech lab or whatever you want us to call it, because you've got that connection with Delos then, and I do like all that. Like, going into the sort of thing, and it breaks that fantasy, and you're going into the modern world, and he sees behind the scenes, and so I do like that. Like a bit like you said with Disney World again, like those corridors that just run off under everything. Like, that this whole lab sort of like runs for miles under this resort, which is so awesome. So no, I do like the finale of this film, like that third act.
Yeah, I do too. I always forget that he is chased, or he escapes through medieval world and through Roman world. Like, that's so unnecessary for the plot. It's just like, let's show those another time. He could just as easily find a grate out in the Old West, outside of town. I do like the sign where it's like, guests don't go any further. How many miles did he run?
Yeah.
Like, this must be many, many miles. He's basically circumnavigated all of the three worlds, the whole Delos compound.
That's a really good point, because you see a map of it at the beginning of the film, and it's two very distinct. I mean, it's a bit like a theme park map because the proportions are slightly off, but it's quite clear that they are not. You can't see WestWorld from medieval world.
Right. Yeah.
They've all.
There's like a trail on the map between them, but clearly it's. I mean, if there was a whole medieval village, a whole Roman village, a whole, Western village, there's quite a bit. You see them out in the country, even in the Western area, there's nothing in sight.
Yeah.
Clearly, this is a long way.
Yeah. So, because when they say they could last, the robots, they can last an hour, they could last 12 hours. When by the end of the film, they start, it does do that shot of it going through the different worlds and they're all just dormant. I'm like, how long has he been running? We haven't seen obviously all of it, but so how long is he being pursued by the gunslinger? I don't know. Passage of time is a bit iffy towards the end of this film.
Yeah. But I'm with you. I feel like that's kind of unnecessary. And I do think the balancing of those three worlds is a little strange. But I love the stuff in the corridors. I love the desperation. Along with logical problems of this movie, like both of us, when we see that nighttime retrieval, sort of are like, yeah, this is cool. Good idea. But we instantly think like, yeah, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
Same thing when I see the heat vision, and how it's shorted out being next to a torch, It's like, okay, where was this heat vision earlier? How does this work? And then you see it's shorted out next to a torch. Well, then how does any robot function in the medieval world, which is all lit by torches?
Well, that's also his upgrade. They also highlight that they've upgraded him
to
have heat vision. And you're like, this sounds like this is a bit of a hindrance. I mean, if they were to have robots with this heat vision or this new vision upgrade in WestWorld, they would have the same problem because they still have gas lamps as their lighting system. So they'd still be producing a similar way of heat. So yeah, you'd still have the same problem.
Yeah, I do like this sort of like callback to sort of Frankenstein, this sort of moment there, and sort of fire,
Mm.
fear of fire and being. But I do love the visual of so I guess I'm not convinced by parts of the chase, but I love the visual of being underground, sort of the hydrochloric acid, and hiding. Wouldn't he see that you're red hot and all of that? I mean, there's logical problems like that, but I love the visual of both the underground area generally, and I also love the visual of the gunslinger with the melted face and
Mm.
then all burned up and the face falling off. I mean, basically every time the faceplate comes off, I'm totally sold on this movie.
There are several, because obviously all practical, and the
Mm.
way they've done it is there's some very good editing and shifting going on in this film to do those things. I mean, when they do show the technical thing, if they go around the lab and they're doing bit by bit, there's several occasions where the camera is sort of filled by a white jacket. You've panned up the body and you've seen it's one of the characters you've identified. Daphne is one of them at one point, and they're going to have a look, but they do it obviously with the gunslinger as well. It pans up, you see Yul Brynner's face, and then like a white jacket gets in the way, and then it sort of leans back, and then all of a sudden they're taking the faceplate off, and I'm like, it looks very smooth. Like the editing and stuff in it is very good, and it's a very well shot sequence. They do it again and again, but also, like you say, once the gunslinger falls, the burnt gunslinger falls off the medieval steps, and then the turns round, like it lurches. It does that again. The horror thing, isn't it? The sort of the killer's final lurch before it collapses, and his face is gone, and it's a very good effect. And it's very effective because the faceplate's on the floor and it's just this hollow face. It's very striking. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Again, like you get the technical issues, and again, this comes from a budget, and I think technical understanding is that when they are talking, as you can probably see us if you're watching the video, our lips are moving and our jaws are moving and that sort of thing. But when you remove the faceplate, it's just a tube,
Oh yeah.
and things like that. But other than that, like little nitpicks and stuff, I love the designs of some of the robot aspects of these androids.
Yeah, and I was just thinking like those shots. I don't know that all of those FX shots are equally good. Some I sort of think like, I see the edges there. But many of them compare favorably to like times where they do that exact same thing on Next Generation 15 years later or even 20 years later. So yeah, they look very good. That faceplate is great. And again, for me, the whole back half of this movie, if what I remember about the first half of this movie is I basically remember Peter and John and just a series of vignettes, and I think that's the way to do it, right? Just give us the cool little chapters. We don't need everything. Think of the implications of this universe and give us little vignettes about it, string those in an order. Fine, we're done. 45 minutes. The back end, I just remember Yul Brynner, just, that unstoppable guy.
Yeah.
And the hydrochloric acid, I don't care. It doesn't really make sense. But I love that he's, it's very Terminator-like. It's just you cannot stop him. His face is melted, he's set on fire. He keeps coming. And you're all alone. Nobody knows. You're out there, eventually authorities are going to respond, but nobody's going to come in time.
Yeah.
You've got to stop. And that works remarkably well.
Yeah, it's really effective. Even up until we reach the laboratory area, the tech area, like being pursued through the desert. I mean, this is the thing. Like, it feels like a western. Like when he shoots John, and then they run for the horses, and they both go off on their horses. Like, it still feels in that western mode. Like, he's the Yul Brynner's dressed like he was in the Magnificent Seven, like all in black. So, now he's the quintessential villain, and he's going to chase him into the desert. Still feels like a Western.
Mhm.
It's the moment he meets the Delos employee that it starts to turn, because then you see that the Delos employee gets shot by, and you're like, okay, like this thing doesn't care. It's on a killing spree, it's on a mission, and it seems to have targeted Peter. And that's, let's say, when the Terminator sort of like aesthetic kicks in, and that's when you get that wonderful shot of it walking up the corridor, and the lights are, it steps from in and out of the dark. I love that shot. And they have a glassiness to their eyes, though. Once they malfunction, they give it like a glassiness to its eyes. And again, I love that effect. But the one thing I find the most interesting is he's been attacked. He's had the acid in his face, and he chases Peter further, and he tries to shoot him down, and the gun fails.
Mm-hmm.
And he looks at the gun, and it says battery empty or battery low or something. And he just chucks it to the floor and carries on going. And then I'm like, well, he hasn't got a gun anymore. What the fuck is he going to do when he gets hold of him? Like, he's determined to kill him, unless he's going to go, tag, you're it, and then run off giggling. I don't know. But, like, I'm like, oh, okay, what? Is he going to throttle him? Is he going to punch him out? Like, what is going to happen
Strangle
now?
him
like,
or...
Yeah. Like, it becomes a bit more brutal at that point. Like, chasing him down with a gun, and this comes back to this whole thing we've said with medieval world and Roman world. Trying to shoot someone down from a distance is one thing, but when it gets up and close, if this thing's trying to kill you, like, it I'm assuming it would be stronger, probably, like I say, it's a bit more durable. It becomes a real threat at that point to me.
Yeah, I mean, stronger and durable minus water,
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I hadn't thought about that, but that's a very good point about throwing the gun away and then it becoming kind of like hand to hand. I just kind of cringe at where you see the gun and it says battery, in red, and he chucks. It's like, where was that battery indicator? This is clearly just a regular gun.
What does the battery do?
Well, I guess it monitors whether the heat of the target to make sure that it. But and then I guess if it doesn't have power, shuts the gun down. I mean, but
Maybe.
it's clearly just a gun. All right. I mean, there's no battery indicator. There's never a convincing explanation for how it's judging heat and doing any of this. So, I mean, it is one of those kind of like, it is one of those moments where you think you just cut to that shot and you think, yeah, I see the only reason why they kept this was because they had to justify getting rid of the gun.
Yeah.
And otherwise, it doesn't make sense that Yul Brynner suddenly doesn't have his gun.
Yeah.
But Crichton kind of cringed looking at that cut shot to battery low,
Yeah.
and thought, oh God, yeah, I have to keep that.
Looking at the film as a whole, though, you've just said about the sections, like, one of the things I find most enjoyable about is, like you say, it rockets on at 90 minutes, and the pace is pretty good. It contains a lot of information and a lot is going on, and takes that left turn for the sort of the finale. But I'm never bored in this film. Yeah, we've talked about some of the logic gaps in things, and as we've said, that we've said it before, like, there are films where those logic gaps would wind us up no end.
Mm-hmm.
In other films where we would really rail on those things. But that tells me that I'm probably a bit bored. But I'm just not with this film. Like, I love the aesthetic. I think the cast are good. I think the idea is solid. And it just, because it's not a 3-hour or 2.5 hour film, I'm like, I'm on board. It's good fun. It's silly, but has some interesting themes. I'm willing to forgive those silly things, from collecting the bodies in a truck to low battery on a gun. Like, I'm willing to forgive them for this film.
No, I agree completely. And I think, the film itself is an idea, right? It's, all right, an amusement park populated by androids. It's like Frontierland at Disney. Just, and don't forget, Disney had all those animatronics, right? It was famous for animatronics. So, all right, we're just going to take that one step further. And what if it was for adults, And then everything else is just kind of like a little idea, like, okay, well, they haven't really thought about how this would work, but they've thought about it enough to think, okay, they could have multiple parks. Okay, there's a control room. Okay, when did they service these? Well, they come out at night while everyone's sleeping. How do they keep the guns from shooting each other? Well, okay, there's this heat sensor. We'll throw that in. They haven't done the same thinking about swords, but all of these are just kind of like little riffs, little ideas. It's such a simple idea for a movie. Such a simple idea. And at 90 minutes, you get in, you get those vignettes. Some of them work, some of them don't. Most of them do to one degree or another. I think the stuff that bores me the most is the medieval world stuff, with that guy. And, it's like, the Black Knight is coming tomorrow. And, the Daphne stuff is better. But that whole thing of like, I want to be the king and be with the queen and, the Black Knight, who gives a shit, Yeah.
But I like the fight though.
The fight with the Black Knight?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right, because the Black Knight is malfunctioning and it's a real fight. Yeah, I like that. There is a kind of like beyond the sexual politics. I mean, like somebody could write a paper about like all of these sort of Chekhov's guns in this movie that don't go off.
Yeah.
We talked about like running out of power doesn't really wind up being important. Daphne being shorted out by water, not really important. The hands, not really important. And then the queen says that the Black Knight basically can't look left, like it has a weak left side, then that's how you win. That does not wind up being important in the fight at all. He doesn't even seem to remember it or try to exploit it. There's an odd kind of like pattern of all of these Chekhov guns never wind up going off.
I agree. Some of them are there to try and facilitate something else, but that's not story, isn't it? Like, yeah. I find the thing with the Queen saying that about the Black Knight. Oh, he has he's whatever. He's blind. His left side is his weak side. And he has if you basically slightly blind the eye or whatever. There's a technician watching that who then goes, "Remember to make the Black Knight blind in his left side." And I'm thinking, wait a minute, did she riff on that?
Yes,
did that android
absolutely.
that android just made that up? And I'm like, wait a minute. So yeah, like that there's things like that like you say, they're not there, or they don't appear to be there to be a Chekhov's gun. They're there to show you how something else works. And if I'm honest, I think that's more what Crichton is interested in. This, as you say, this is an idea. And I think that's where Jurassic Park comes from. He made this film, wasn't able to do the vision that was in his head for budgetary and visual effects purposes. And so went away and wrote Jurassic Park in a similar way, because Jurassic Park deals with the science and the technology behind it in a lot more detail. And that's a very sort of two-handed book in that sense. But again, like with the Daphne thing, like you say, it's just this weird thing where like they've made out that he has to use hydrochloric acid to take out the gunslinger, and then a sip of water takes her out. And I'm like, bucket over his head then would have been fine, wouldn't it? And the end of the film.
Right, just get some in his mouth. I mean,
hose.
Well, and the other thing is like, I mean, having dealt with hydrochloric acid, in science experiments and stuff, does it really melt this guy's face? Like, I mean, this is overdone. Like, who thinks throwing hydrochloric acid in a robot's face is going to destroy him? It's a little strange.
Yeah, I don't think that you're right though. They are definitely sort of like Chekhov guns that don't go anywhere, and that's a shame.
Well, I kind of like it. I mean, in some ways, it's the haphazard notion of this movie where there are these logical problems, but you're just along for the ride, and it's a short ride. It's an amusement park ride. Yeah, I mean, it's a fun amusement park ride of a movie. But I kind of like that. Like, it's in a movie that doesn't amount to too much, we've managed to find deep themes about mankind's nature, about human nature when we're allowed in a universe in which there are no rules. That there's no hero. I
Mhm.
mean, and also that all of these structural elements of Chekhov's guns that don't go off for a movie that really doesn't amount to an awful lot and isn't really all that ambitious as a movie, it manages to do these really different, ambitious
Mhm.
things that I really admire it for. I don't know that all of them are deliberate, but they're really cool.
Yeah, and the other thing is, it's like you say, it's insanely influential.
Mm.
Like you said, there is Westworld fingerprints all over the Terminator. And obviously, then Crichton went away and created Jurassic Park, which then became a massively successful Spielberg film. And it's clear that Spielberg went and watched this film. Because I think there are
Mhm.
shots and things within Jurassic Park that are clear homages to Westworld. And then the TV show, which we'll get to from next week or the next episode, again taps into those themes that we've just talked about, or they've probably sat down and done the same thing as a story group and gone, this idea doesn't quite work in this way. How would we do it today? Because I think that the TV show does try and address a lot of these things. But yeah, I recommend this film. It's good fun. It's
Yeah.
just a good fun film. It's a 70s film. There's a lot of fun. What I wouldn't recommend, and we won't talk about much, is
Oh,
Future
yes.
World, its sequel, which is dreadful.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's not good. Look, I mean, the worst thing, Westworld is it's 90 minutes. You might say I'm not in love with it, but you're gonna have a good time. Future World, Future World is organized around the idea that Delos has reopened after Westworld,
Mm.
and I'm glad we're not going to talk about it. But it's reopened after Westworld. But then you uncover this conspiracy to replace the world's leaders with androids, which is such a cliche, right?
Hmm.
You could do a version of that and do it well, especially as a metaphor for corporate greed. But the movie just does not.
Yeah.
And nothing in that movie, it's got ideas that I like, but nothing in that movie really works. And then I haven't even seen more than the pilot. There was Beyond Westworld. There was a TV series, which is like if you thought Westworld had too big of a budget and too many androids, have we got a show for you?
Yeah.
It's terrible.
It didn't go far. Yeah, no. I mean, it's one of those, again, the ideas that you can see why people have gone, this is a good idea, but it needs budget, it needs storytelling, and it needs craft and creativity. I mean, to talk about Future World, one of the things was, and this was a direct, as I believe, was a direct note from the studio, is we want Yul Brynner on the poster, so he needs to be in the film, but the character doesn't fit in any way in the film, so they insert some weird, really uncomfortable dream sequence where one of the female leads has a ballroom dance with the gunslinger. I haven't watched it in a while because I hate it. I'm not a fan of the
Yeah.
film, but all I remember is this dance sequence and just being like baffled as to what the hell was going on. So
I do
yeah.
remember, like at the end, it's kind of like a reporter as the main character, and he's kind of like caught up in all this, and he has this girl, and I don't remember she's a reporter too, but I liked at the end they're sort of just leaving Future World, and they barely made it out, and there's a kind of like sense of them in this vast room as they're leaving, and it has a feeling to it that I like, of sort of like there is a version of this movie that could be done that's good. But it just is not enjoyable, and none of it works. In quite the opposite way, that there's a lot that is wrong with Westworld, but all of it works, or 90+% of it just works. Future World is the opposite. There's stuff that's smarter in Future World than elements of Westworld, but it just does not. It falls on its face. Nothing works in that movie.
Yeah, repeatedly. Yeah, we won't be doing it.
Yeah,
I'll save everybody. I'll save everybody that chore. But yes, so that was Westworld, 1973's Westworld, the first stab at this idea of the theme part that goes wrong. But we are going to be revisiting WestWorld over the next 3 episodes, and we are going to be looking at the TV series, the HBO TV series, run for 3 seasons. So starting from the next episode, we'll be looking at season 1, and I think it's called The Maze. So each season sort of has a name, and so I've only seen the first season and bits and pieces of the rest. I think I've seen most of the second series, so looking forward to really getting into this and exploring this in more detail and seeing if they are able to tell this story in a more modern and deeper way.
As am I. I mean, I've seen the first 2 seasons. I haven't seen the third. But I was so excited for, in some ways, not to spoil it, in some ways I love it. In other ways, I'm disappointed by it. But having Jonathan Nolan do a reboot of Westworld, as much as we love Westworld, it's got so much opportunity to expand that idea and flesh it out and deal with other things. It seems like such a no-brainer to reboot that and deal with some AI stuff as well and identity, that I'm so glad that they did do that, even though, we'll get into the results.
Yes, we will. We will talk about those as we go. But Julian, as always, it's been an absolute pleasure. And
my pleasure. I've learned about Westworld by talking to you.
Yes, me too. No, it's always good. So yes, we've travelled Westworld, and we'll be back in the next episode. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and we shall see you again soon.